For decades, Sam Elliott was the Hollywood cowboy who kept his grudges locked up tighter than a saloon safe. But now at 80, the man with the gravel voice and the stare that could freeze a rattlesnake has finally spilled the beans. He's naming names, not rivals, not enemies, actors he flat out couldn't stand. Want to know who made his blacklist? Saddle up, because the answers may shock you more than a six-shooter at sunrise. Benedict Cumberbatch. When Sam Elliott unloaded on Benedict Cumberbatch, it wasn't some polite Hollywood disagreement. It was a verbal gunfight. Back in 2021, Elliott appeared on a podcast and tore into The Power of the Dog, and he didn't hold back. He mocked the film as pretentious, scoffed at its pacing, and then aimed his sharpest bullets straight at Cumberbatch. The British actor, he claimed, looked prissy and stiff, more suited for a Victorian ballroom than a rugged ranch. "What the hell does this Brit know about the American West?" Elliott growled, his voice dripping with disbelief. To him, authenticity wasn't optional. It was everything. He saw Cumberbatch's performance not as a cowboy, but as an actor playing dress-up in boots. Elliott believed the role had been stripped of grit, silence, and danger. It was theater masquerading as frontier truth. Hollywood reacted instantly. Critics blasted Elliott for gatekeeping the Western, accusing him of clinging to outdated ideas of masculinity. Younger fans argued Cumberbatch's take was layered and brave, but Elliott stood firm. He didn't issue apologies, didn't walk it back. For him, this wasn't a style clash, it was about respect. To Sam Elliott, the West was a way of life, not a costume. Behind the scenes, insiders whispered that Cumberbatch had been hurt by the remarks. He had trained extensively, learned real ranch work, and stayed in character off camera. But none of it moved Elliott. No amount of method acting, he said privately, could close the cultural gap. For Elliott, Cumberbatch represented everything wrong with Hollywood's outsider interpretations, art without understanding. In the end, Elliott's criticism revealed less about Cumberbatch and more about himself. He was a man unwilling to let his vision of the West be diluted, and for better or worse, he fired off his shot and never holstered it again. Nicolas Cage. Some actors love fireworks. Nicolas Cage built a career on them. The wild eyes, the sudden screams, the unhinged energy, he turned chaos into a trademark. But to Sam Elliott, that wasn't genius. That was disorder. Elliott, who spent a lifetime preaching the power of restraint, saw Cage as the polar opposite of everything he valued. To Elliott, the best acting was a quiet storm, a pause heavier than a paragraph, a stare that spoke louder than any explosion. Cage, by contrast, erupted like dynamite every time he appeared on screen. It didn't matter if critics praised him as daring or audiences loved his unpredictability. Elliott watched and saw only noise. The two actually worked together in Ghost Rider. Elliott delivered his role with the weathered gravitas fans expected, while Cage tore through scenes with manic energy. On set, there was no shouting match, no dramatic clash. But observers noticed the distance. Elliott was polite, professional, but cold. Later, he described certain actors as more firework than flame. Everyone knew who he meant. In private, Elliott said Cage was acting for attention, not for truth. He dismissed Cage's operatic flourishes as hollow theater. To him, real storytelling was about disappearing into the role, not bending the story to match your personality. And while Cage collected awards and stayed a pop culture icon, Elliott refused to budge. He saw chaos where others saw brilliance. It wasn't bitterness. Elliott didn't envy Cage. He just felt betrayed by a system that rewarded spectacle over substance. Where he had built his reputation on silence, patience, and authenticity, Cage embodied the opposite. Elliott considered it a fundamental betrayal of the craft itself. For Cage, the screen was a stage. For Elliott, it was a mirror. That divide was too wide to bridge, and it left Elliott with a disdain he never bothered to hide. Kevin Costner. If there's one thing Sam Elliott despises, it's when Hollywood polishes the dirt off the West, and in his eyes, Kevin Costner was guilty as charged. Costner's turn in Wyatt Earp, and later his powerhouse role in Yellowstone, won audiences and critics. But Elliott, he wasn't buying it. To him, Costner was a movie star cosplaying grit, dressing up in cowboy hats while never carrying the dust under his fingernails. Elliott, who grew up steeped in the real culture of the West, saw himself as a man bringing live truth to the screen. His gravelly voice and sun-worn face weren't props. They were the residue of a life built on authenticity. When Costner strolled onto the Western stage, Elliott reportedly rolled his eyes. He once told a close friend, "He plays a rancher like it's Fashion Week, not real life." Behind the scenes, tension simmered even when they never publicly clashed. Rumors floated that Elliott was approached for a cameo on Yellowstone, a moment that could have united two icons of the genre. But Elliott turned it down flat. He called the show a soap opera with a cowboy hat. To him, it wasn't storytelling, it was branding. While Costner's fans saw him as keeping the Western alive for modern audiences, Elliott felt betrayed by the glamour. He believed the genre wasn't about scenic helicopter shots and pretty speeches. It was about grit, silence, and moral weight. Costner's glossy version, to him, stripped away the spirit of the frontier and replaced it with a marketable family feud. The distance between them never exploded into words, but it lingered in silence. One producer put it best. They never shouted, but the chill between them could freeze a desert. For Elliott, the West was sacred. For Costner, it was entertainment. And that difference turned admiration into disdain. Jared Leto. If you really want to get on Sam Elliott's bad side, try turning acting into a circus. That's exactly what Jared Leto did in Elliott's eyes. From sending rats to co-stars on Suicide Squad to staying in character long after the cameras stopped rolling, Leto became Hollywood's poster child for over-the-top method acting. Fans and critics debated whether it was genius or gimmick. Elliott didn't hesitate. It was nonsense. "Acting isn't a carnival," he once said, dismissing Leto's headline-grabbing antics. For Elliott, the craft was sacred, something that demanded humility and truth. You didn't need to traumatize your colleagues or live as your character 24/7 to deliver a great performance. You just had to know the story and disappear into it. Insiders say Elliott was once loosely attached to a project that later went to Leto. When Elliott found out, he quietly walked away. No press statement, no fight, just silence. That was his way of making the loudest possible point. Sharing the screen with someone he believed cheapened the craft wasn't an option. To Elliott, acting that called attention to itself wasn't acting at all. It was ego on parade. Leto may have won an Oscar and built a loyal cult following, but Elliott never saw authenticity in the stunts. He saw theater dressed up as truth, a performance that blurred lines for spectacle rather than substance. This wasn't jealousy. It wasn't generational bitterness. It was values. Elliott spent his career proving that the quietest moment, a glance, a pause, could carry more weight than all the screaming in the world. Leto, he believed, had forgotten that. In the end, Elliott never confronted Leto directly. He didn't need to. His silence spoke volumes. Ashton Kutcher. On paper, Sam Elliott and Ashton Kutcher should have been an odd but interesting pair. Netflix's The Ranch put them side by side, with Elliott playing the grizzled father and Kutcher the cocky son. But behind the scenes, Elliott reportedly saw a troubling picture of what Hollywood had become. Kutcher, he felt, was the perfect example of charm over craft. Elliott didn't blow up at him or start a feud. That wasn't his style. Instead, he let subtle signs do the talking. A narrowed glance here, a quiet head shake there. Crew members recalled him muttering under his breath, "He's a decent guy, but no real actor." Publicly, Kutcher praised Elliott, calling him a mentor and a legend. Privately, Elliott remained unconvinced. He viewed Kutcher as a product of an industry that rewarded quick fame and social buzz instead of hard-earned skill. While Elliott had clawed his way up through small roles and background parts, Kutcher rocketed into stardom off sitcom punchlines and tabloid headlines. To Elliott, that path felt shallow. It wasn't personal hate. It was professional disappointment. Elliott believed acting was about living truthfully in the skin of a character. Kutcher, in his eyes, looked like someone mimicking performances he had seen elsewhere, rather than wrestling with the weight of a role. Yet Elliott never sabotaged him. He didn't make scenes harder or poison the set. His disapproval wasn't loud, it was steady, a belief that Kutcher represented the new Hollywood he no longer trusted. Fast, flashy, and forgettable. For Elliott, the ranch became less a family comedy and more a reminder of just how far the business had drifted from the values he held sacred. Jane Campion. Sam Elliott's feud with Jane Campion was never about one film. It was about philosophy. When The Power of the Dog hit screens, Elliott didn't just attack Benedict Cumberbatch. He aimed his fire at Campion herself, a director from New Zealand telling a story about cowboys in the American West. To Elliott, it felt like an outsider's stylized postcard, not the lived-in truth of the frontier. On a podcast, he mocked the film's entire portrayal of masculinity and ranch life. To him, Campion had no business dissecting the cowboy myth when she hadn't lived it. That criticism alone would have stirred controversy. But what made it explode was Elliott's sharp tone. It wasn't polite disagreement. It was a dismissal, straightforward, blunt, and unforgiving. Campion didn't take it quietly. At the Directors Guild of America ceremony, she shot back on stage, calling Elliott a little bit of a nuisance in front of the whole industry. She didn't mince words. To her, his critique wasn't just about style, it was about control. She accused Elliott of gatekeeping a genre, of refusing to let new voices and perspectives challenge the old archetypes. For Elliott, the West was sacred ground. For Campion, it was an evolving story, and in that divide, sparks flew. Critics rushed in, labeling Elliott's comments as outdated, even sexist. Fans of Campion argued she had brought vulnerability and complexity into a genre long dominated by men with guns and gravel voices. Elliott, however, never walked back a syllable. He stood by his position with the same stubbornness that defined his career. He believed the West wasn't a canvas for interpretation, it was a reality, carved by hardship, silence, and grit. The clash between Elliott and Campion became more than a feud. It was a cultural standoff, old Hollywood values against modern reinvention. And Elliott, true to form, refused to surrender. Jeff Bridges. Not all of Sam Elliott's grudges came from flashy antics or mismatched acting styles. Sometimes they came from something quieter, disappointment. His relationship with Jeff Bridges is proof. When they worked together in The Big Lebowski, they seemed like two halves of the same coin. Bridges as the easygoing dude, Elliott as the stranger with the voice of God. Their chemistry on screen was legendary, and off-screen, the respect felt genuine. Fans thought they were kindred spirits, two men cut from the same cloth. But according to insiders, things shifted after Bridges won his Oscar for Crazy Heart in 2010. The performance was brilliant, no one denied that. But with the win came a new polish. Bridges suddenly seemed less accessible, more aware of his Hollywood stature. Elliott, who prided himself on humility and grit, felt that distance immediately. He didn't blast Bridges in interviews, he didn't feud in public, but he let his silence do the talking. They stopped showing up at each other's premieres. They stopped praising one another in the press. And when Elliott was asked about changing friendships in Hollywood, he delivered a cryptic line: "Some folks change. Others just show who they always were." Fans and journalists alike read it as a veiled nod toward Bridges. It wasn't betrayal that hurt Elliott, it was the drift. He had believed Bridges was a brother in arms, someone who shared his values of authenticity and humility. Watching him shift into a more polished, Hollywood version of himself left Elliott quietly wounded. For a man like Elliott, loyalty is sacred, and losing a friend to evolution, not conflict, can sting the most. His disappointment in Bridges wasn't explosive, it was mournful. And maybe that's why it stayed with him longer than any feud ever could. So there it is, Sam Elliott's 7 Hollywood grudges, revealed after decades of silence. From British stars to method-acting daredevils, from glossy TV cowboys to former friends, his disdain tells us one thing. Elliott never bent his code. Do you think he was right to call them out, or was he stuck in the past? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that rattle Hollywood's bones. For decades, Sam Elliott was the Hollywood cowboy who kept his grudges locked up tighter than a saloon safe. But now at 80, the man with the gravel voice and the stare that could freeze a rattlesnake has finally spilled the beans. He's naming names, not rivals, not enemies, actors he flat out couldn't stand. Want to know who made his blacklist? Saddle up because the answers may shock you more than a six-shooter at sunrise.